What are your recommendations to Iranian dissidents and dissident groups? How can they get their act together and be a united front or semi-united front against the Islamic Republic government?
Well, as I said before, and it was very important to explain it again and again in the Soviet Union. And as the one who was like a spokesman, I had to invest a lot in different groups, accepting that we have common ground, that with all the differences. And of course, we had monarchies, and then you only think Ukrainian nationalists and Russian monarchists. They want absolutely opposite things. But both of them need to remove this awful regime because they both are suffering with this. And the thing is how to convince that it will not make more difficult your cause, but it will make much more easy if we will first remove this regime.
Thanks so much for watching. This is an interview with Natan Sharansky I did for IranWire.com. Natan Sharansky is one of the most famous and influential Soviet dissidents. He was a refusnik, meaning he was a Soviet Jew who fought for the rights of Jews in the Soviet Union to practice their religion and migrate to Israel. Natan Sharansky was also active as a human rights campaigner in the Soviet Union. He worked closely with Andrei Sakharov, the famous nuclear physicist and human rights campaigner. Sharansky was arrested in 1977, and then in 1978 he was sentenced to 13 years in prison and hard labor. And funnily enough, 13 years after his trial, the Soviet Union collapsed. But before that, in 1986, Sharansky was released because of international pressure. He almost immediately migrated to Israel, and after a few years, he became a member of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. For 9 years, he was in the Knesset for 9 years, and after that, he was for 9 years the director of the Jewish Agency, an organization that's dedicated to help Jews all around the world and also facilitate Jewish migration to Israel. In this interview, because Sharansky is not part of the Israeli government or a member of the Knesset anymore, we did not talk about Israeli policies or Israelis' domestic policies especially. My main purpose in this interview was to talk about the dissidents, Soviet dissidents, how different groups of dissidents work together to fight against the Soviet regime. And also, I wanted to talk to Sharansky as a patriotic Israeli about Iran-Israel relationship, the war between Iran and Israel, the war between the Islamic Republic government of Iran and Israel, and also the future of the relationship between the two countries. As I said during the interview, I do not agree with Sharansky about everything, but this is not a confrontational interview. I try to create a space in which he could express himself freely and we could have an open and civilized conversation. Do you think that the dissidents, individual dissidents and dissident groups, played a part in the demise of the Soviet Union, or it was only because of the Western pressure that Soviet Union collapsed?
No doubt that Western pressure was very important, but Western pressure existed only because of the activity of dissidents. By the way, once I really insulted, without intending to do it, at Mikhail Gorbachev, because at one of the international forums, I was asked, what are the major figures or people who are responsible for the demise of Soviet Union? And I said, number one, it's Andrei Sakharov. Number two is President Reagan. Number three is Mikhail Gorbachev. And he was there, and then he told me, I am the one who made decision to release you from the prison against all the Politburo. And you're putting me on the number three. I told him, number three is a great place. after Sakharov and Reagan. But that's really how I feel, and I explain why. They every totalitarian society, and the Soviet Union was a classic totalitarian society, has three types of citizens. It's true believers, those who believe in official ideology. There are the dissidents, those few who are ready to speak, risking their life and freedom, and the double thinkers. Double thinkers, people who don't believe in this ideology, but are afraid to speak publicly. And the longer the dictatorship exists, the bigger the number of double thinkers. And it's the revolution happens when double thinkers stop being afraid in big numbers. Then they go to the barricades, and then suddenly it falls in a few days. But somebody has to keep this spark, which will turn into the fire. So dissidents are those who are keeping this spark. And the second very important thing, dissidents understand the society. You know, Sovietologists, all the specialists in Soviet Union, were predicting that Soviet Union is forever, and that's why we have to find way to appease it, and so on. And my friend Andrei Malrik wrote in 1969 book, essay, where the Soviet Union will exist until 1984. Because of Orwell, of course, 1984. But he predicted exactly why Soviet Union will fall apart. Of course, he was arrested for this book, he was punished. But in fact, in 1985, Gorbachev came to power and started dismantling the Soviet Union exactly in accordance with the predictions of dissidents. And we, even in the prison, we understood what's happening inside society and why this powerful superpower is so weak. We understood it better than anybody else. So, and we tried all the time to bring this knowledge to the outer world. So, both in terms of influence of dissidents on the people inside and their influence on the West in terms of understanding the society.
There were different types of Soviet dissidents. There were the nationalists, there were the liberals, there were the refuseniks, there were the reformists. Did they work together on their campaigns, or they had their own campaigns and without cooperating with each other?
Well, first of all, really there was a lot of different groups, which is objectively can be explained because Soviet Union consisted of many nationalities, of many persecuted religions. Almost practically every religion was in one or another way persecuted. And in addition, inside dissident human rights movement itself, there were different views. There could be Marxists, communism with a human face. There could be monarchies. There could be some classical liberal human rights activists like Andrei Sakharov. And so they were, and in addition to all this, of course, KGB always tries to create many groups inside. That's why, as a rule, dissident movements practically everywhere have a lot of inner conflicts because they have different agendas, but also because KGB of their country is working very hard to create new conflicts inside them. So it was not simple. But first of all, the dialogue, practical of every group, was very important because in terms of KGB, free thinking was against the law. So in these terms, naive communists with a human face, which we believe they are absolutely out of touch with the reality, as they were. But the very fact that they were discussing openly these views was very dangerous for the system. So they fought against all types of this. Now, to organize real cooperation was not simple. That's why Helsinki Group, which we created.
We get to the Helsinki Group a bit later, but before that,
yeah,
I had
my problem was not in the fact that there are so many different groups and views, because they all it was good that they exist, because they all had their own turf, their own audience. My problem was that I simultaneously belonged to two movements, and that becomes the problem, because the other movement says, why do you belong to them? I belonged, and that it was a very, very small group of people who were at the same time were connected to Jewish movement for the right to immigration and to human rights movement, with Andrei Sakharov being my mentor. So no doubt that there was a strong resistance inside these movements, not against, let's say, Jewish movement was never against dissident movement. They had a lot of respect on Andrei Sakharov and so on. But the moment you, Zionists, become involved with them, then KGB changes attitude to us, because one thing if we want simply to leave, and the other thing if we want to change the regime. That's what I was hearing all the time, that decide you cannot be one of us at the same time bringing the anger of KGB for being involved with dissidents, and vice versa. Dissidents were saying you have to decide: are you person of the world, universalist, or are you a nationalist? And by the way, I always believed that both sides are wrong, that real strength you can find from your roots, but the real appeal to the world you have speaking about fighting for human rights, and one is helping to the other. But that is, if there were people who felt themselves belonging to or felt solidarity with two or three movements, they had a problem. But coexistence of these movements was very good for fight against the regime. At the moment there was synergy, like in Helsinki group, that really brings to explosion.
I haven't found any criticism by you about any other Soviet dissident, but there are others like Vladimir Bukovsky and Medvedev, Roy Medvedev, who were critical of the others. How did these people who are maybe in a polar position in this dissident movement, work together for toppling the Soviet regime? And I mean, I'm just giving them as examples. Vladimir Bukovsky, who was a very vocal dissident, and he basically accused anyone who saw any part of reform within the regime of working with the regime. And Roy Medvedev, and who's still alive, actually lives in London, he thought that there can be the Soviet regime can be reformed. How did these different opposing ideas coexisted within the movement?
Yeah, well, you're right that I was I tried not to criticize anybody in this distant movement, because nevertheless, I felt myself like I'm the one who is very active in Zionist movement, in the movement people want to leave. And I personally respected practically everybody, Solzhenitsyn and Sakharov, and even Roy Medvedev, and with Bukovsky we became the best friends. But I didn't think that I have to be involved deep in the dialogue between themselves about what kind of future will be in the Soviet Union. Now,
You didn't want to be involved in that.
in debate between them, for example, it's clear that I was never knew I'm the pupil of Andrei Sakharov. I was working with him. I was helping him with press conferences. By the way, then they became like spokesmen of two movements, Zionism and human rights. So, and as a result, of course, I was very critical about some statements of Solzhenitsyn, both because of disagreements with Sakharov, and also because as a Jewish movement, and he was very nationalist oriented and so on. At the same time, as a spokesman, I knew about huge influence that I really used for ourselves to explain to the world what is Gulag after Solzhenitsyn was 1,000 times easier than before. So I didn't want to undermine in any way, even a bit, his influence through his books and his courageous behavior. At the same time, disagreeing greatly with the way how he saw future of Russia. But I'm going to leave Russia anyway. I'm going to help to millions of Jews to leave Russia. That is my struggle. So why should I now attack him, Solzhenitsyn, for his view of Russia? In specific way, day-to-day work with the KGB, definitely I was with Sakharov. I was helping him to write his letters, to connect with the and I agreed practically everything what he read, what he wrote. I was an enthusiastic supporter. Roy Medvedev, as I said, it was very important that his critical voice was heard because everybody, the moment he is critical, is enemy. On the other hand, I never believed that his view of communism can be implemented. Communism, I believed, like Bukowski, that it's absolute evil, and well, the moment you accept the principles of communism, you're becoming supporter of totalitarian regime. That's how
You
I
didn't
felt.
believe that communism could be reformed, the communist
Yeah,
regime.
no, but Gorbachev did believe, and he started reforming, and it all fell apart. Because you cannot have a little bit of freedom or partial freedom. Or people are free or people are enslaved. And the idea of communism was enslaved people in order to make them equal. So I didn't believe in it. Yeah.
So, the reason I'm asking you this question, and you and I, we talked before about different factions within the Iranian opposition groups and different dissident groups. And since a few years ago, their best pastime is just to criticize each other instead of criticizing the regime itself. But from what you're telling me is that you disagreed with many of them, with Solzhenitsyn, who was ultra-nationalist, ultra-religious person, but you thought that your criticism would be counterproductive.
Ultra-religious can be understood wrongly. He was not ultra-religious like the revolutionary guards of Iran or some other fundamentalists in Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. He was seriously religious person, and he believed in the future of great Russia. And here were some disagreements, clear disagreements. At the same time, he helped a lot to the world of human rights to make our case to the world.
But that's the whole point, that whoever can help the movement to topple the regime should be a potential ally and not be regarded as an enemy. And we're going to talk about the Helsinki group, the Moscow-Helsinki Watch group. But before that, I think we have to talk about the Helsinki Accords, which included more than 30 countries, all European countries except for Albania, I believe.
35 countries, yeah. 35.
Yeah, so many countries. And in that accord, the Soviet Union accepted to respect human rights to a certain degree, and because of that, you had the Moscow-Helsinki Watch Group. What persuaded or forced the Soviet Union to be part of these accords with the West?
Okay,
they were forced or they were persuaded?
That's a very important question to answer and to understand, because it's also important for today's world. Soviet Union felt probably that it was a great achievement, and we dissidents felt that it's awful failure of the West. Again, the West permits to Soviet Union to deceive itself, or maybe even wants to be deceived. Why we think of this? Soviet Union had a great record of lip service. For example, the Declaration of Human Rights, and the Soviet Union signed it, and he's a member of United Nations who is in support of human rights. But each time he insists in his dialogue with the West that you have your understanding of human rights, we have our understanding. You have a lot of hungry people, and that is their freedom to be free to speak and to be hungry. And here we have no hungry people. We have no unemployment. Well, nobody is getting any serious money, but we have no unemployment. Well, because unemployed people simply go to prison. But it doesn't matter. They were insisting that they have their understanding of human rights, and that's why you have to respect our understanding, we respect your understanding. And what was happening? In the end, the free world was accepting it, was accepting in terms that we have to cooperate with them, we have to restrict competition, arms race. The Soviet Union is a big power. Let's not challenge them. As a result, we hoped all the time that human rights principles will be brought in order there will be pressure on Soviet Union. And Soviet Union in the end always succeeded to get away with the lip service. Here they signed, after many years of negotiation, agreement, which has three baskets. And the first basket is that the world recognized the borders after the Second World War, and that the borders should not be changed by force. Well, today it looks ridiculous what Putin is doing in Ukraine, but then it was a great victory of Soviet Union. Why? Because it is the only country which gained territories after the Second World War, which part of Poland and, of course, Germany became, Baltics became part of the Soviet Union. And the West officially was not recognizing it. Also, the fact that there are this Hungary and Czechia and so on, Soviet satellites, and Soviet Union guarantees the survival of these regimes, and no intervention. Now it is officially recognized that there will be no intervention. All this was like big victory of Soviet Union. Then there was second basket, which insists on economical cooperation between East and West. But that's what Soviet Union wanted all the time, economical cooperation without any political conditions, because it desperately needed it. And then there is third basket about human rights, which in advance it said it's unbinding. So it's like expression of the intentions that every country intends to keep such and such and such rights. So you mentioned Bukovsky. Bukovsky immediately said the West betrayed us. And here I'm sitting with Yuri Orlov, who was an outstanding scientist, but also dissident. And we are discussing how we can make it more difficult for the West to be deceived, to be duped, or how the West, to put the West in such situation that they cannot deny or they cannot pretend that they don't see the violations of human rights. And I propose that let's have different groups of dissidents, two representatives of this, two representatives of this. We'll have a letter of
Sorry, I just have to ask you one question here. Do you think in 1975, when the accords were signed, the West was willing to forget about the human rights? They would be willing to sacrifice human rights?
On the 1st of August, when it was signed, 1975, if they'll be asked, of course they said, no, finally we have some kind of understanding. But we knew how it's developing then. In 1948, when the Declaration of Human Rights was signed by the Soviet Union, nobody will say, well, but of course, Soviet Union will not observe it, and we will get away, and it will get away from this. No, but in practically, when it is coming to the arms race, to economical cooperation, to threats of Soviet army in Asia or in Europe, okay, so we are concerned about the fate of human rights. Well, let's ask them to release this dissident, that dissident, and go ahead with this. That was more or less the day-to-day life. And that's why when the West gave such a huge concession, in reversible concession, okay, you conquered countries after the Second World War, it's yours. Baltic, Estonia, Latvia, Estonia, okay, it's yours. We don't like it, but what to do? We recognize that it's yours. We are not going to fight with this. You want our cooperation because you are out, practically cannot compete in high tech and so on. Okay, we will help you. But for this, you have to promise us that you will behave on human rights. And saying in advance, of course, it's not unbinding. It was written, it was accepted that it's not like international law that you can be brought to the
But from what you were saying, human rights was an afterthought. It was not part and parcel of the agreement.
No, I think for the honor of the West, it was very important. We are not giving up, recognizing so easily your occupation. We simply accept that's the matter of life. But from now, let's live as decent people.
Yeah.
And we understood it's impossible. It's like that now communism will be with human affairs. It will not be. It will not survive like this. So it will continue insisting. So, but how to make it more difficult for Soviet Union to use it as lip service? And that's when I came with this idea of let's write a letter of dissidents of all types to all the 35 public of all these countries and have some dialogue. And Yuri at some moment said, more dialogue, more letters, it will not help. We have to create the Helsinki Watch and start collecting documents and publishing them and sending to all these countries. And here is what really is happening. And he said to me, of course, I think in the end they'll arrest us and even accuse us in high treason. I said, well, I'm with you. I think they'll arrest us, but of course they will not go so far as high treason. They'll say anti-Soviet activity. Year after this, I was accused in high treason. He was accused in anti-Soviet activity. So, but in a year, we all were arrested. But this year already changed a little. No, we created it in April '76. We were arrested 11 months after this. Or some were exiled to America, like Lyuda Alexeyev. But what happened during this year? For the first time, dissidents of different groups, we had 11 founding members, practically all of them are belonging to different groups, and then others start joining. They're preparing documents, detailed information about what's happening with Ukrainian prisoners, or what's happening with the priests in Lithuania, what's happening with Crimea Tatars who are exiled, and of course what's happening with Jewish immigration, but specific, detailed, and send it to all these countries. Here, Soviet Union is violating its own obligations. And because there were so many people who wanted to force Soviet Union to take it seriously, and there was a lot of course, sympathy to our cause. So it became a celebrated cause. As American Congress created their own Helsinki Watch group, including senators and congressmen, in order to study our documents. And so on and so on. So that's how Helsinki Agreement turned from lip service document that Soviet Union hoped into this paper which was haunting Soviet Union practically on every negotiations, on every attempts to get cooperation with the West, until the death of Soviet Union. So Soviet Union thought that they're signing some very good agreement for them. They signed their death sentence. And that's what
again, I think what you're saying is that it's very important for dissidents and dissident groups to take advantage whatever deal the dictatorships sign, because even if it's non-binding, it can be used as a lever to put pressure on the dictatorships. The same way that you guys looked at this treaty that some of the dissidents said it's a betrayal of the dissidents by the West, but you thought that, okay, this is something that we work on, this is something that we can work through, and it eventually led to an international movement that eventually led to the demise of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, well, I'll make it formulate a little bit different. You take what you have and you try to do most of it. It doesn't mean that you agree with this agreement, but it does depend on you. You're a dissident. You're not. You don't decide for them, and even for the West, you don't decide what they will sign. You're not happy, but try to see how you can use it for your own cause. And of course, for different types of dissidents, say, look, we have many disagreements, but we all agree that we need to remove this regime. So let's try to solve our disagreements after. Until we remove this regime, we have one united cause. That's also very important.
Oh, I was reading your book again last week, Fear No Evil, and one of the parts that I don't think that it resonated with me the first time I read it, maybe about 20, 25 years ago, was the level of infiltration by the KGB into different groups, especially you're talking about the prisoners. They were called the Stukachi. Stukachi, is that how you pronounce it? Yeah,
Stukachi,
Stukachi.
yeah.
Stukachi. Yeah. So, can you tell us about the way that the KGB, the Soviet Union's intelligence service, infiltrated within the dissident groups, and whether they used agents provocateurs in different cases, the radicals who try to stir problems for the other dissidents? How did they work?
Well, there are different levels. First of all, we have to understand that is a country which has to control not only lives but brains of 200 million people. Because any type of dissent is dangerous for them. So they don't want to permit people to think differently, but of course they cannot decide in the end how they think to express their thoughts. It's dangerous for stability of the regime. But how you can control it? There is no internet which permits today to know many things. So there was a lot of informers, practically in every school, in every laboratory, in every clinics, in every plant for sure. There was official KGB department, and that's everybody knew that who was talking with people who are suspicious or promoting people. But this KGB department also worked through numerous informers. So nobody knew, but everybody knew that if there are 10, 15 people, one of them is informer. After the Soviet Union fell apart, it became known that at least 3 million people were in one or another way informers, what means like one for every 70 citizens or something. But that's the first level. That's mainly that the authorities will know in advance to whom to start to suspect. More serious thing is, of course, is when people are trying to be themselves part of some dissident group, and there are some roles. One of these roles is to simply to know what they're doing. For example, when we decided we have to go to different cities and to collect their information about violations of human rights in the Jews, you have to understand Soviet Union is a huge empire. 12-hour zones are there. There is no internet and of course no public connection between dissidents, so you have to go physically to collect this information. So one of those who went to one of those cities was informal KGB. We started suspecting them then, but many of us were arrested. It became finally clear when he appeared by trial. But so that's rather low level of a provocator who simply has to collect information and to put it in time. The more high level is, of course, those who are making provocations themselves, like Lipovsky, who became the main. He was himself trying. He was working very seriously for KGB for many years. His father was sentenced to death for so-called economical crimes. And then, in order to save him, he agreed to cooperate with them. And he was their agent for a number of years. He deliberately went to CIA to proposing his services. Thanks God they probably suspected something, but he wanted to help the KGB to accuse all of us that we are CIA agents. He didn't succeed only because he didn't succeed with his attempt to penetrate CIA, but in fact they very often try to make some of their agents very extreme or not necessarily spies, but to make them like those who are trying to prepare some kind of killing of some people. And all this in order to compromise the movement. And then they had to prepare it, to go aside, and then to compromise. Well, more or less, we avoided it, but some national movements were victims of such extremism.
What do you mean they were
For
victims?
example, like some Armenians organized some explosion in the subway. Nobody knows from where they came, why they did it, that they were arrested and somehow disappeared in Gulag and so on. But the Armenian national movement was accused that in fact it is terror or whatever. And then they arrested some very pure dissidents and made them to, they were not involved in any of these awful things. I was in prison with some of them. Let's say it made them easier to arrest them. They couldn't prove really that they were making this crime. So in the times of Stalin, they didn't even need to prove anything. They were simply killing a lot of people and saying that they're part of this plot. At our times, they couldn't simply say that they're part of this plot, but these kind of provocations will create a kind of public opinion atmosphere around these groups. Yeah. Well, by the way, we didn't have much of it in the Soviet Union, definitely in the last period when I was active. In the first years of Soviet Union, there were some terrorist groups who were really fighting against Soviet power. In our days, there was practically, it was all destroyed many, many years ago. It was clearly intellectual resistance to the regime. And even when somebody was proposing even minimal violence, we were fighting against it. We wrote, let's say, world jury was supporting our movement. But some of these world jury movement organizations were using kind of hooliganism against Soviet organizations. And I was among those who signed a letter calling them not to use any violence, because all our power is the fact that we are non-violent, we respect international law, and we are fighting against those who violate international law of human rights. So, but on one hand, it's good. On the other hand, it makes it much more easier for KGB to penetrate, because practically everybody, every writer or every thoughtful person who wants to express his criticism freely automatically becomes member of our club. We don't have any criteria. We're not checking people. And I think it was our weakness, but it was also our very big power. I knew in advance that among people that I'm dealing with are KGB agents, but I have nothing no secrets. We are saying to KGB the same what we are saying to all the world.
So you were open in your fight against the KGB,
yeah, look,
Soviet Union.
When we are organizing a demonstration, usually it's a demonstration of 10 people, no more. Why? Because the more people are in the demonstration, the more chance that KGB knows in advance. But the fact of the demonstration is open. When I am helping to Andrei Sakharov to write a letter to President Carter, the fact that we wrote this letter, prepared, that I passed it through some tourists abroad is a secret. But the moment this letter reaches Carter, it becomes huge news, and we are very happy about it. I gave some long interview. It was the first time that there was practically cinema or tape made inside Soviet Union, and it became very popular. But in order to have this tape, the journalists came, and 3 days secretly we were having some interviews with some refuseniks, with some dissidents, and then they took it also very secretly through other tourists abroad. But the moment it is abroad, it becomes a very popular film. So, of course, we had no secrets about our aims and what we are saying about Soviet Union. But in order to reach the world, we did have to make many things secretly.
So, if you want to tell young people now about the most successful campaign by the Soviet dissidents, what is the example that you can give them in terms of organization, in terms of achievement, in terms of the
Well,
international
no
agreement?
doubt that Helsinki group was unique, both in terms of cooperation of different groups together, in terms of drawing attention of the world, and in terms of results. We really changed the attitude of the world to the most important agreement which was signed between the world and Soviet Union. That was a big success. If I'll take specifically our Jewish movement, look, and our Jewish movement was based on the activists who are ready to risk their lives, but also on the broad support of Jews all over the world and mobilizing many non-Jews. So just at the time when Soviet Union was going, or the United States of America under President Nixon was going to sign an agreement with Soviet Union about free trade agreement, and that finally Soviet Union could get access to economical power of the West, and it needed it desperately because the economy of slaves cannot be effective, and it wanted to compete with the West. And just at the time when it was almost signed, there came Senator Jackson, Democratic Senator from the United States of America, and passed the amendment to that without free immigration, there will be no free trade. And of course, it was President Nixon and the Secretary of State Kissinger were absolutely against it. They wanted detente with Soviet Union. And here some groups of Jews don't want detente. So that's how they want to present. But it was extremely successful lobbying activity. In the end, all the Congress, no, almost all the Congress was on our side. And this Jackson Amendment, later when I was arrested, it was mentioned like 20 or 30 times because what a big damage it did to Soviet Union because of my, whatever, treacherous intentions. But in terms of historical struggle, no doubt that it helped. It's empowered a lot those who were fighting for opening the gates of Soviet Union. In fact, Soviet Union, to the end, when Gorbachev came to power, one of the first things that he was struggling to have freedom of trade and freedom of economical cooperation. And here he comes to Washington on his first visit, 250,000 Jews come, and the Jackson Amendment is like the symbol of this linkage between the policy of freedom of migration and relations with the West. So these are the big victories. But of course, there were also failures.
Before talking about the failures that I want to talk to you, actually, I want to ask you about the failures as well. But in terms of the Helsinki Agreement and in terms of the Senator Jackson's decision, it came because of engaging Soviet Union in a dialogue. It was not because of sanctions or because of isolation. Do you think that it's necessary to have some sort of dialogue, some sort of the negotiations with these authoritarian regimes, dictatorships, in order to be able to help people inside? Or do you think they should be isolated and
Depends. Negotiations, yes, but what kind of decisions are made? For example, there were a lot of negotiations during which Soviet Union was also reminded about interests of the West. I tell you, if you look down through the archives of White House, what I did recently, because everything what was, let's say, 50 years from now can be published. And so it's interesting to see how President Reagan had more negotiations with Soviets than anybody before. But the set of this, the order of the topics was such that nobody, neither Nixon nor Carter, nor anybody before, spoke about human rights and put the linkage between Soviet Union wanted not to have army race in the space, as so-called Star Wars. They were frightened to death. And each time, Reagan was very open to negotiations, but he was very firm, we don't trust you because of what you're doing with your own people. And because we don't trust you, we have to put counter missile weapons into the space. And it was very effective. In the end, it became very effective. But for this, on one hand, you must have dialogue. On the other hand, you must be very firm. Because we have many other types of negotiations, especially European countries, speak very firm, but in the end, they want compromise. And then they compromise on our account, meaning on the account of what kind of regime will remain. So to negotiate and to be firm is very important. But how to negotiate simply to give up or to look nice but not to irritate dictator is very dangerous. Like I'll tell you, during the Iranian Revolution 2009, when President Obama's message, in fact, was that engagement with the regime is more important than changing with the regime, from my point of view, very, very harmful. At that moment, I thought that it's very not productive. But if you are negotiating and are going to stick to some principles and which are not given up, well, that's very good.
Yeah, because I've read your articles and your op-eds about negotiations and including human rights in different negotiations, that you emphasize that it's not only helpful to the people, but also it can have more tangible results about the nuclear program or about the arms race, etc. We'll get to that in a moment, but I want to ask you the last question about the Soviet dissidents and what were the most glaring failures of the Soviet dissidents and why do you think those failures happened?
Well, failures happen usually when, as I said, there are provocators or stukachi who are working also psychologically. And KGB itself is working psychologically. For example, famous case of Yakir and Krasin. It was in the middle of the 70s. There were some leading democratic figures who, among other things, were responsible for publishing underground informational newspaper. And it was the first time that there was regularly, there was every few months it's published, few hundred pages of violations of human rights, but published. What do you mean published? Typed at homes secretly, but then somebody is taking responsibility. And it was clear that they are the leaders. They were arrested. And of course, as I describe in my book with my interrogations, they're good in creating this atmosphere of fear that you are alone in the world, nobody will help you. But then it's not enough. And they seduce them by saying, look, we will destroy everything what you're doing, but you will destroy and arresting many people, or you will be the one who will save all these people. You will not look good. You will have to publicly say that you stop your activity. But and you'll send to all these 20, 30, 500 dissidents the letter asking them to stop this activity. But as a result, we will not arrest anybody. And you will be the one who will be their savior. And then they appeared on the press conference and they said that they call all their colleagues, it's not wise now to resist and stop, but and we are guaranteed that there will be no repressions now and we need time and so on. It was like huge failure for all the dissident movement. But I just joined, sometime before Zionist movement, they were telling me, don't deal with these dissidents. You see how they're behaving with the KGB. And really for 3 years, this chronica of current events, as it was called, was stopped. 3 years after this, another dissident, another Sergei Kovalev and the others publicly took responsibility for this and continued their work, and they were arrested. But this spirit of fighting for human rights and dialogue with the free world was restored. So it was specific, I think maybe the biggest failure of that group around Andrei Sakharov. And no doubt that, of course, KGB violated all their promises. And then one of these persons was after this drinking vodka until his death all the time. The other was permitted to move a few years after this to Paris, where first thing which he did, organized a press conference and stood on the knees and asked for pardon of all his friends. But later, years after this, when I was arrested, they were trying to use their example to make me to cooperate. And of course I didn't. But I have to say that these type of things have a lasting influence and help to KGB then to try to destroy the other people.
So basically, the failure was a result of accepting the demand of the interrogators and the KGB.
Oh, yeah, the result that you think you're strong, then when you're put in isolation, you lose your feeling of connection with this struggle. You become weak. You're afraid, and then they give you the way to get out of it nobly. I'll discuss in my book. I also show the miserable fate of some of such people who were very good before, who were very honest and brave, and then through fear, they convince themselves that they can do more for their people by cooperating with KGB, and the results always are very sad.
Yeah, I recommend everyone read Fear No Evil. That I think it's one of the best books about Soviet Union in the early 1980s. But let's go to your recommendations based on years of acting as a dissident, as a politician, as someone who've been observing the situation in Iran. What are your recommendations to Iranian dissidents and dissident groups? How can they get their act together and be a united front or semi-united front against the Islamic Republic government?
As I said before, and it was very important to explain it again and again in the Soviet Union. And as the one who was like a spokesman, I had to invest a lot in different groups, accepting that we have common ground, that with all the differences. And of course, we had monarchies, and then you only think Ukrainian nationalists and Russian monarchists. They want absolutely opposite things. But both of them need to remove this awful regime because they both are suffering with this. And the thing is how to convince that it will not make more difficult your cause, but it will make much more easy if we will first remove this regime. And we will continue our debate and our competition in different means after this. And if you believe that majority of people of your nationality would like to be separate, and the other believe that they will enjoy monarchy because there are many advantages, okay, let's have this debate after this. And I think that's something very important also for Iran, because Iran is like Soviet Union, has many different nationalities. I don't know whether you have many different religions like Soviet Union, probably not, but there are groups of very
different religions, yeah.
Yeah, and definitely in different economical conditions. And there are students' organizations, women's organizations, trade unions, who and no doubt scientific elite. You have great writers. I'm sure they see the future of their country very differently. But as long as they all agree that this regime has to be changed or removed or transformed into something very different, they have to think how how broadly they can cooperate. Not fully, but they'll find out that their cooperation can be much more broader, especially when it's coming to the lobbying of your interests, when broadening the camp of double thinkers. So that's first about relations. Second, you have to remember that your turf is the double thinkers. The double thinkers, whether you are working with the trade unions or whether you're working with the scientific elite or you are working with the Kurds or the people who are still afraid but don't believe to this regime. So they want to change this regime. Why it is important? So it's not one or another action which can change them. It's systematic work with your turf. That's why to have access to this, well, in our days, we could only dream to have such access, like you put this start link and you can get a lot of information. There, to get a piece of information from one person to the other, sometimes it took weeks. But still it was clear that we have to have dialogue. It cannot be the small group of revolutionaries. It has to be the change will come when suddenly millions of people will stop being afraid. So they have to be already double thinkers. They have to be already suffer from the fact that they cannot express themselves. And then at the moment, it will go up. So it is very important not to think in terms of one event, but in terms of how you are working, broadening this camp of the people who don't trust this regime.
Cooperating with each other.
Yeah.
So you started your activities in the Soviet Union as a refugenik, as someone who fought for the rights of the Jewish citizens of the Soviet Union to migrate to Israel or to other places.
Or to live as Jews in Soviet
Union.
Huh? Or to migrate. And also there was a problem, there was all the cultural life was not
for the rights, yes. Yeah.
There was no way that you can celebrate Jewish holidays. There was no way that you can learn about Jewish holidays.
And in fact, in your books, you say that you didn't know anything about Judaism. You just knew that you're a Jew and you were discriminated against.
Oh, yeah. The Jew meant that there is anti-Semitism. There was no other meanings.
Yeah.
So it all changed.
Yeah, and then you were also the director of the Jewish Agency. So this concept of Aliyah, the migration of Jews to Israel, is very important to you. So I wanted to ask you, as a citizen of Israel, as a patriotic Israel, to talk about these patriotic sentiments in Israel, because many Iranian hardliners, many Iranian officials, they're trying to cast doubt on patriotic sentiments of Israelis. Recently, a former Speaker of the Parliament, Ali Larijani, said that the Israelis are not patriotic at all because they've come from all around the world, like you came from Soviet Union, someone from Holland, etc. And as soon as something happens, they go away. If you were sitting in front of Mr. Larijani or people like him, what would you tell about this Israeli sense of patriotism?
Well, first of all, I would say that it's a shame for Iranian to speak like this, because, for example, in Israel, it is, with all the problems with the regime, of course, and we can speak a lot about it, but the very fact that Iranian people are ancient people who stick to their ancient culture is something very respected, by the way, as also about Chinese. Israel, I think, Jewish people are absolutely unique example that for thousands of years, if you look the history of the Bible and so on, and look that we are speaking the language that our ancestors were speaking 3,000 years ago. We are continuing this belief in one God, which Jews brought also then to the other religions. And our prayers are the same as they were 2,000 years ago. And these prayers are connected to Jerusalem from 3,000 years ago. And so I, the one who was disconnected absolutely from any tradition, and then rediscovered that if only I will decide I can be part of this history, of this tradition. So I know myself how much strength it gives to you, and how much strength it gives you to fight for the freedom of the others and so on. So the fact that we were insisting for 1,000 years that we will return back to Palestine next year in Jerusalem, it's not by accident that I said my last word before sentencing, maybe to death. Said, what you want to say? I want to you, I have nothing to say. To my people, say next year in Jerusalem, because I knew already that how for 1,000 years it was strengthening this feeling of solidarity. So Jews came back to the land of Israel after 2,000 years of praying and continue the life which they had 2,000 years ago. That's very powerful message to those who appreciate the tradition. And Iran, I think, Iran as a people, not Iran as a regime, as a culture, as the way of thinking, should be really be appreciating this insistence of Israelis. Now, what it means that we are living, we never left, we were exiled. Yeah, we were very successful also in helping the others be successful in Spain, for example. And then one day, and we were the highest power, like, almost like American Jews today. And then one day we were told, or convert to Christianity, or leave, and hundreds of thousands were simply killed or then exiled. But that's something what was happening practically in every small country of Europe dozens of times. You're invited, you're welcomed, you help to, you become very successful, help to the others to be successful, and then you're exiled. So some moments, and whenever we were the most successful or the most exiled, we were always speaking about connection to the land of Israel. So to say that we are not patriotic is, we really want to insist on something which is unusual in this part of the world, that we want to be democratic and Jewish at the same time. And it is very difficult when you belong to the Middle East, where democracy doesn't exist by definition. You simply look at the Freedom House map and you'll see. And we are also insist that we are part of the free world where national state becomes less and less popular, or at least was becoming. Now it's become again. And we want to keep this both. It's very difficult, very difficult. With the wars which you have and how in these wars to remain democratic civil society, it's extremely difficult. But to say that we are not patriotic for somebody, or maybe he doesn't respect this connection with the tradition, but then he's probably bad Iranian.
Yeah. No, I think I just wanted your answer about patriotism. I think we can avoid talking about Israeli politics for now because there's a lot of questions to ask about that. But you've also said that Iran is an existential threat to Israel. Why do you think Iran is an Islamic Republic of Iran is an existence?
No, this specific regime, which not only didn't make a secret, said publicly from the very beginning, there are the big Satan, America, and there is small Satan, and started organizing seminars, World Without Zionism, and explained that and at the same time tries to have nuclear weapons. And doesn't make a secret, simply uses the term that Israel is the country of one bomb. Yeah, what means that one nuclear bomb will be enough. And probably they're right. So it's all natural that we understand that we can never accept that this regime will have one bomb. And that's really extreme confrontation. I can say that when I only joined the policy in 1996, in my first visit to Russia, and it was like I was big hero. 9 years was in prison. Now I'm coming for the first time as a minister and welcomed everybody, all the leaders of the Soviet Union. But in addition to official celebration, there is I've asked 5 minutes secret conversation with foreign minister, and that's our intelligence asking me. And I said to them that all this will take. We want all to be friends, but it will take us nowhere because Russia is bringing modern technologies of the weapons to Iran. So it happens that it's 96, and that's what our government is concerned. And they said, oh, no, it's impossible. We don't permit. I said, here is the piece of information which I was permitted to tell you. It was secret. And I read them at that moment, these parts for missiles. And then they recognized it was people are punished for this, we want good relations. We are speaking about 30 years ago. Then our government was obsessed with the idea that one day Iran, this regime, not Iran, this regime will have a nuclear bomb and the means of delivery, which they have today. Right? So there is no other regime in the world that we were so obsessed. Why? Because that is the regime which, from the very beginning, declared that Israel has to be destroyed and has potential, because we know how big is scientific and other potential, has potential to have this weapon. And that's why Israel, yes, I can say, the one who was 9 years in government and 9 years the head of Jewish agency, Israeli leaders were always, of all the parties, obsessed with the fact how not to let this regime to destroy us. And by the way, and discussion about the changing of regime were much less, because Israel, nobody took it seriously than, let's say, in America or other places. The conversation was also how to prevent this regime from having the weapons with which they can destroy us.
And in 2013,
by the way, I want to say simultaneously, Israelis have tremendous respect to Persian culture. How, as you understand, we have serious problems with the Muslim world, but though Persia, Iran, is part of this Muslim world, somehow all its culture is viewed very differently. I don't know rightly or wrongly, but it's maybe because there are also many Jews who came from Iran, and but that's.
Yes, and there's a very vibrant Jewish community in Israel, Iranian Jewish community.
Iranian Jewish community,
as well. Yes, definitely.
Which has very positive feelings about Iran of their times. No, not about the regime, but about
positive and nostalgic at the same
time. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So in 20...
For example, it doesn't happen with Jews from Morocco. We have a lot of Jews from Morocco. They don't have this. Well, not speaking about Jews from Russia. So it's not goes without saying that they have very positive feelings about their cultural roots.
Yes. So I wanted to ask you about an op-ed that you wrote in 2013 when Hassan Rouhani was elected as president. And Hassan Rouhani was smiling. He said that he wanted to have better relations with the world. And you said that you asked the question whether Hassan Rouhani can be Iran's Gorbachev. And you said yes, but we have to help him being Iran's Gorbachev. You mentioned the fact that when President Reagan negotiated with Gorbachev, he insisted on human rights. And at the same time, they were talking about the nuclear program and the arms race, etc. But the fact that President Reagan insisted on human rights. Do you think the West missed an opportunity to emphasize on human rights issues when they were negotiating the JCPOA, the nuclear deal in 2015 with Iran? Or do you think it was a bit of a wishful thinking that you wrote that op-ed?
No, absolutely. Well, I wrote also article, I don't remember, you know better, but I don't remember, article after this agreement was signed. And I said, frankly, I am not a specialist in nuclear weapons. How we can prevent, whether this, the debate, our government felt very strongly that it doesn't prevent But I think I am a specialist in what is happening with the totalitarian regime. And the fact that negotiating that agreement, President Obama, and I know it almost firsthand, refused to link it to any questions of human rights. Simply, the moment you're doing it, they're saying, well, it's a different world. We are not talking about now, we are doing how to save the world. And the way, I remind that simply to start negotiations with the Western world, Soviet Union had to change their ideological language. Like before, they were speaking about the world communist revolution. Our final aim, in the end, there will be world revolution, and everybody will be happy with communism. That's what we were studying in school. That everybody was, in order they will start negotiating with Americans about some kind of arms agreements and so on. They had to change and start speaking about detente, about cooperation. That in the end we will come to this, but it's not our aim now to change it. That was the fact that America negotiating didn't even ask them to stop using the terms big Satan and small Satan. They had the seminars on the world without Zionism, meaning without Israel, at the same time when they were negotiating the agreements with the West. So how you want to know if regime started changing?
Yeah, that conference was 2005. But do you think that now that the Europeans are going to negotiate with Iranians about the nuclear program, and there are certain rumors that the Americans will start negotiating with Iran about the nuclear program. Do you think human rights and respect for human rights and rights of minorities should be part of these negotiations, and make other parts of the negotiations more effective?
I definitely think that they should be part of this negotiation. I am very doubtful that it will be, because whether President Trump or President Macron will put human rights as part of their negotiations about nuclear disarmament, I doubt. Whether they should, yes, of course they should.
But the question is, do you think that it would make the other part, like the main part of the negotiations, the nuclear negotiations, even more effective if the human rights is part of the negotiations?
The situation was the way how the regime is treating their own people is like the early warning station. If you know, when Soviets and Americans were negotiating, a lot was about early warning station, that how on the early stage they can understand that the others are. And then we are trying to explain that attitude towards the dissidents, towards their own people, that is the early warning station. Because the more dictatorial the regime, the more easy it is for it to ignore anything. And Iran is making a big deal that you will not control this or we will not control this. The best control which we can have is freedom with people have free access to information inside Iran. So for many people in my own government, definitely the Western governments, it all looks like every naive don't. Once Ariel Sharon told me, Natan, and they had a lot of respect to my past, but he said, your ideas are good for the cells of KGB, but not for the sands of the Middle East. Here, you must be tough, you must be strong, and not speak about whatever. Think about human rights in Israel. Don't think about human rights in Egypt. That was. I think, yeah, I'd be very happy, and I think the world will be much more happier, and Israel will be more safe if the Western countries will put as a part of their negotiations with Iran the question of human rights in Iran.
As my last question, I know that you're not in the government, but you were part of the Knesset for a long time. You have still.
And the government. I was 9 years in prison, 9 years in the government.
9 years, yes. And you still have very good connections with Israeli politicians. Based on the recent attacks against Iran, do you think that the Israeli government right now, I mean the Benjamin Netanyahu's government, they have a good understanding of Iran and Iranian people?
Look, some have better understanding of Iranian people, some have less, but they all had, in fact, there is no opposition in Israel to the opinion that Israel cannot afford to permit Iran, to the Iranian regime, to be close to the nuclear bomb. The moment Iranian regime has nuclear bomb, all our future of Jewish people 3,000 years ago is in big danger. That's very strong feeling. That's why the fact that because after all these complications, after all this, and by the way, nobody in Israel has any doubt that Hamas and Hezbollah were so powerful because of Iran. In fact, Hezbollah couldn't exist without Iran. And so we had the feeling all the time that we are fighting when we are fighting with Hamas and Hezbollah and even Assad regime. It's all we are fighting with Iran. And now it is clear that Iran, that's our intelligence believed in it, that in 2 months Iran can have nuclear weapons. So there was no opposition. There is also opposition to Netanyahu's government and many things. On the opposition that if they are close, we have to strike, there was no. And the feeling that we could do it so powerfully, meaning that discussion was all the time what one air raid can bring, whether it will postpone it for months or not postpone. And here the fact that we could do it in such a powerful way to establish control over this and to convince Americans to do things that we couldn't do is viewed as practically by everybody. They have no doubt, practically by everybody as a huge, huge success. The debate is whether it is will make Iran safe for us in the next 1 or 2 years, and whether there is any chance that this regime will be changed. Here are very different schools of thoughts and very different approaches.
What about the debate about going overboard and killing civilians in Iran, for example, attacking the prison or the state television, which didn't have to do anything with the Iranian military or the nuclear program? That did not make sense to many Iranians. And it seems from our viewpoint, we are not part of the Israeli government either, that there is a sense of pride or maybe being too proud that we can do everything militarily, so we can bomb the television, we can bomb the prison, and then that way we can bring change to Iran and make Iran into a democracy. I think for many Iranians who hate this regime, it was really surprising and in a sense mind-boggling what was Israel's goal in terms of bombing the prison, killing dozens of people, including prisoners who hate the regime, and bombing the state television.
Okay, so first of all, you can read, I think it was in Washington Post, my article 24 hours after we attacked Iran. In fact, Washington Post asked me if I want to react. I said I'll write a piece, and they published, which is not usual because we are not in the same political power. And there I say, from my conversations with some, I speak there in the article also about importance of the attacking on nuclear, but also importance of supporting dissidents. And I said that from dissidents in my conversations, I heard such a point of view that if it will be attack only, because the Obama administration in 2009 said that any attack will weaken the dissidents. I said that attacks on the regime, from the opinion that I got, will not weaken the dissidents. Attack on the guards of revolution will not weaken. Attack on the simple soldiers who are part of the people, of course, and that's why we have to be careful. But at the same time, now that was my opinion in the first day. I have to say that though there were, I don't know, 500 victims, if you think about 12 days of bombarding, it could easily be thousands and thousands. Israel was not targeting deliberately civilians. Not only civilians, it was not targeting deliberately those who are not involved in this program. Now, as
targeting
sorry,
prisons would be
apartments of the scientists. They in the very the scientists who are dealing with nuclear. And by the way,
no, but I'm talking about prison and the Iranian.
No. Now I want to speak about two things. Yeah, television. Israel believed that or hoped, and some dissidents told us that 2 or 3 or 4 days more, and the regime would be changed. Israel hoped that this regime will be changed, and then we will not have to think about nuclear weapons or any other weapons. We will be friends. And the symbols of the power, TV was believed from all this history of revolutions and so on, that TV, which is controlled by the regime, it will be a very powerful message. And so, and I think that they are getting many approvals in the history of dissidents, how it was important for them that the regime who's talking against them cannot talk for some moment. As to the prison, I believe it was a huge miscalculation, because the people who believed that this regime can be toppled by the Iranians themselves, many of them were speaking about prisons, how people can get out of prisons and they will be the leaders of this. And I think it was naive. You are not try, and they told me that we were targeting the entrance. But you see, the regime is there. It controls the street. It's counterproductive. You are doing it when the regime lost full control, when they ran away. Like I think it was in Syria. You remember in Syria, there was attacked big prison after the regime practically didn't exist. So from my point, that was a mistake, and I don't think that Israel will repeat this mistake. As to television, it will be very difficult for you to convince that what brought more sympathy of the people to regime, because that's not what usually is happening. This TV is not symbol of people's capability to talk to one another.
Oh, but when you attack TV, you're killing the engineers, you kill camera people, you kill people who are working in the accountants, accounts department, bookkeepers, etc. So you're not only killing the
you're right.
But anyways, we can agree to disagree on that. The last question is that you are a great Soviet dissident. You know a lot about democracies. You know a lot about dissidents. And you are aware of the situation of dissidents in Iran. We've had conversations before. What do you think, Benjamin Netanyahu? I know, and you may not have an answer to this question, but what do you think that Benjamin Netanyahu's government want in place of the Islamic Republic among the different groups, that are available? Of course, they may want to have a perfect democracy in Iran, but that's not on the cards. What is their ideal replacement for this regime at the moment?
First of all, I don't know. And second, I really don't think that people here are sitting and planning what will be next. They're sitting and planning how to deprive regime of the weapons which are dangerous for us. As to this, of course, we would like that it will be friendly regime. Whether you want or not, the only name recognized among dissidents, meaning not like I know many dissidents, but which is recognized by the world, is Reza Pahlavi. So I must from them why Israel is trying to put. Israel is not trying to put anybody. You must be really crazy to think that whoever will be recognized. And I think that is a big challenge now for dissidents, not for the governments, not for Bibi Netanyahu, and not for your president. That is a big challenge for dissidents, to find figure that you can, at least for some time, until the regime is changed, to recognize that he or she or they are our leaders, and to unite your efforts. And the moment this such group will have a name recognition, then people like Israeli government, the other governments, will do everything to have good relations with them, to make sure that after the war they will not be their enemies. But at this moment, if I don't know if you are making some polls, but if we make a poll about name recognition in Iran and among democratic groups, practically the only name that can come to people is Reza Pahlavi. I met him when I met him in 2008. A very good person. Whether he can be leader or not, you have to decide, not Benjamin Netanyahu or somebody else.
But in general, you believe that the Iranian dissidents, they need a person who can somehow, they can rally around.
Or person, or some group of people to whom they can delegate the power. Otherwise,
and he's the only name that people recognize at the moment.
Yeah. I think it's very important that that your minorities will have some leaders who can cooperate with the Persian leaders. It's very important, but it can be decided. It cannot be. Some people can say, "Oh, Israel is really trying to make this person." Nobody's trying. I don't have to be inside the government and of course, I'm meeting many ministers that I have good relations, but nobody is in this business of thinking how to make this or that person. You have to decide between themselves, and it is, by the way, it is very important. And if I were you, I would have now sessions day and night in London, in Los Angeles, in Washington, in Paris, wherever you want. But sit day and night and decide how you're building in the next 3 months its cooperation between ourselves. And who are the people who can speak in your name?
Well, thank you so much, Natan. That was a great conversation. I think it's very important for Iranians to hear from people like you, especially someone like you with a unique experience of being a dissident in Soviet Union and knowing about the gulags and how to organize dissidents, and also as an Israeli politician and an Israeli citizen, to understand the Israeli narrative. And of course, the purpose of this conversation is to have a conversation. Yeah. I don't agree with everything that you said about either Soviet Union or Israel or Iran and Israel. And you don't agree with a lot of things that I may say and my opinions, but it's very important to be respectful, to listen to each other and to talk. And I think Iranians and Israelis, they have to accept that they are going to be there for the next few centuries until, of course, we'll have an environmental disaster that will kill all of us, unfortunately, which we don't think about. But Iranians, they cannot get rid of Israelis. They have to understand that. And Israelis, they have to understand that by killing people, they cannot liberate them. Yeah. So I think, thank you so much.
Two remarks. Thank you. But two remarks. First of all, I think it's really not enough for Israelis and the Iranians to tolerate one another. Really, these two ancient people in this part of the world, we have so much to live together, not to tolerate them. And second, as a result, I do hope that one moment we can continue our conversations in Tehran in friendly atmosphere. And then let's have all these disagreements, no problem. If it is in Tehran, in a safe environment, it's already great progress. I don't.
Oh. I've traveled to every country in the Middle East, and I think Iranians are the most maybe pro-Israeli people in the region, despite what the government says. And Iran and Israel, they are natural allies. they don't have a real beef with each other. They don't have any borders. Israel has not taken any land from Iranians. If Iranians stopped threatening Israel, I don't think that
Yeah,
Israel would have any problems with Iran either.
absolutely.
So I think, but the problem is that this type of conversations do not happen, because many people, they look at Natan Sharansky and they say that, no, he's a Zionist. He says that, he has the right to be in Israel. So I'm not going to talk to a Zionist, and look at what they're doing in Gaza or whatever. I think these type of conversations have to happen. We're going to have more conversations with you and others in order to understand. And I really look forward to being in touch with you. And if our audience members have any questions, they can send it to us and we can forward it to Natan, and hopefully he will have the time to answer.
I'll be happy to answer. And as I said, and the aim must be that in the end we'll continue this conversation in Tehran. Okay.
Until yes. Well, let's hope that we can have this conversation in Tehran University at some point.
Well, yes, yeah, of course.
Why not?
No, not in the military center, in university. Great.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right then. Well, thank you so much.